Okay, let's. Welcome to tonight's episode. A title that is very close to my faceless face. The title of tonight's episode is Rage of the Last Tier. And so this concept arose to me of forgiving the self of selves. And so I realize, of course, people forgive, of course, not just because they want the peacefulness of mind, the space of mind, their attention not to be occupied, because sometimes when you forgive the world, you allow the world to breathe anew. And so sometimes forgiveness could mean that when you see someone, you do not hold them to a certain light or the same impression you had. You, in some sense, allow the new to reintroduce its own self to the world. I thought about it, and I'm like, okay, if I can forgive a self, myself, or some other self, what would be the self of selves? How would I forgive, and why would there even be a need to forgive the self of selves? Because I find that in the philosophical self inquiry of the human being, there comes a point where all the mechanisms, all the methods of the intellect will feel as if they're hovering in empty space, just like every atom of our reality. So I find that there will come a moment where human beings have to confront the change of their world, or in some sense, subconsciously they can perhaps blame if you think you are from the world, you're an extension of this world. You have in some sense stood up from the earth. So in some sense, in some sense, your greater self is the world. You know. So think about forgiving the world for how it's designed. That means for a second, all the suffering, all the all the data and information that your mind has processed from the beginning, all of this. Imagine seeing the simultaneous as you see its relativity, also seeing in ways that it is not relevant. It's not relatable. What I mean by this is that the rage of the last tier is a certain emotion I want to introduce, kind of. It's an emotion, of course, again, I said it from the beginning. It was inspired out of my personal realms. Throughout these talks and these, since 2014, I can tell you that there is a vision I constant get, and that vision is not with character, it is like a pure emotion. I don't know how to explain it. And it's the rage of the last year. I thought about what's a good metaphor, the closest metaphor, and imagine right now an extraterrestrial species attacked, invaded our species, and one by one you saw what was human domain, what was the simple place where the human being lived, is being replaced by, let's say, some sort of advanced extraterrestrial species. Okay, cruel extraterrestrial species. In that moment, when you see that every person has certain thresholds of tolerance, okay, that means like certain things you take away from a person, so their psychology can become like a cornered animal. Do you know? And the thing is, when the last thing, imagine the most dearest thing you in some sense conceive, and when that thing is being kind of disturbed, then there comes the rage of the last tier. The rage, a sort of will. You can say it's a sort of intensity of the will in retaliation. That means many moments in life, and especially as a child, I'll tell you. Some people say, what is childhood for? I'll say it's for falling down. Your childhood, if you don't make mistakes, I don't know what you're doing. Because the point is that in certain points in your life, you must be the student of those moments. Certain points in your life, if you're still the student, that means you are not even acknowledging what you were given. The rage of the last tier is another way of saying in a sort of incredibly intense event when the last fundamental, the last foundational archetype of the conscious being is questioned, they can no longer point their fingers at the free will. That means the free will realizes it has lied to itself in certain dimensions. And in those dimensions, it doesn't, it's in its own psychological kind of ethical system, morality renders it null. So it doesn't mean that we as human beings are, for example, and if there were, if I'm saying if there were higher dimensions, other dimensions, and we were wondering about how to navigate or enter them, in some sense you can say some people may feel their consciousness attributeless. I personally am, a lot of my personal school of thought focuses on the sense that you're a attributeless presence simultaneously as you are a kind of attributeful kind of personality, a personality with tons of attributes. The Sufi dervishes had a saying, and it's an intense one. And the saying would say to die before you die. To die before you die was a suggestion, was an idea that it's like when the child is born, so you can see that the objective realm, the objective body of the child has developed. But when you go to kind of see, like, okay, when does this child actually become a person? Let's say by the age of, I don't know what scientists say, like, I don't know, 12 to 14, 11 to 14, the child's identity, individualism develops. It begins kind of grounding more as a kind of solid figure. You can say children are must first learn individuality before collectivity. I find that if life was a mountain that you kind of climb up and then come down, the up is the upness of as youth climbs up the mountain, it is individual consciousness oriented. That means the experience of life is individually kind of oriented. And I find the rest of life, you'll I think every human being will kind of get a sense when they're midway, you know. Maybe not, I don't know, but I'm saying like some people may get a sense when they're midway. And so as you climb down the mountain, you are required to live as a mind. So think of it this way: half of the human being's life, it's a body that is projecting a mind. But as life becomes the physical resources in some sense diminish their capacity, like I can totally see how my physical existence is different than 20 years ago. So it's one of those situations where you are a body um, wondering about the mind, but as you go down the mountain, you are kind of like a mind wondering about what's going to happen to the body. So you can say, this is why I find the youth kind of forgets health, especially in today's modern society. It's kind of strange. We need, on one hand, freedom of innovation in various altered states of mind. At the same time, we need to protect the sober state because it took us 4 billion years to reach a natural kind of civilized kind of state. You see, life in regards to the mind of the human being can be considered as stations. Anyways, um, so the Sufi saying of to die before you die meant the ideology, that this subjective phenomena. Like if you're a human being right now listening to me, and you kind of are experiencing that you have a mind. Well, guess what? The subjectivity of all the thoughts you have ever had are orbiting around the first attempt to be a shape. The drop falls from the clouds, from the heavens. As it falls from the clouds, it says, "Why have you forsaken me?" The drop looks at the cosmos. He's like, "What have I done? What was my mistake? Why am I an individual kind of drop falling in the middle of like nowhere?" And like the drop is falling, and the drop doesn't know where it's falling. It can't see where it's falling to, but the drop is falling, and it's going through the misery and suffering and lifetimes of individual kind of association. It's like, "Oh my God, I'm gonna die. What's a little drop like me gonna do? What kind of influence does a little drop like me have?" And that little drop in the vertical dimension is a lost soul. When it hits the ocean in the horizontal dimension, it was always found. So, what I mean by that is really the relationship of one's mind is a shifting of self and world. Right now, you feel you're the self, you feel you're in the world. I find what is occurring behind our eyes is we are being the world and we are observing a self. So what that means is behind your eyes, you're being the world before the self. In front of your eyes, you're the self before the world. These are very important distinctions. Life, of course, its elegance. Some say language, is the spice of life. That we human beings, our power of rhetoric, the ancient Greeks made this very clear, is what kind of animates us. So I find that the issue is the world. I saw this in Japan. Let me tell you, what's occurring is that the children of the future generations are becoming weaker, but the demand of them to be stronger is increasing. Do you know what that means? That means people, their subjective realms are overpowering them. Language is caging man from his own greater action. And so when I see this monument, I believe it's from America. I think it's, to be honest, I don't know what monument this is, but anyways, this monument, it feels to me it's an American monument. I feel it's in America, but I don't know. But in this monument, what can you see? You can see the turnness of minds to raise a flag. And that's what we kind of need to understand, or at least the modern generations, I hope. I hope they understand that the task of a collective system is to build firm foundations. So if you right now feel alone, most likely you are getting more observances of the collective. If you right now feel collective, super extroverted in a community, most likely you're observing how people are alone and individual. Do you know, it's so fascinating. We are truly the authors of our experience when it comes to language. Let me tell you the most important attitude. Oh, thanks. So, guys, Hunter from the chat section has just made it clear it's the Marines raising the flag at Iwo Jima. Oh, okay, yeah. So Iwo Jima. So this is Japan, yeah, the Japan Wars. Oh yeah, yeah. Okay. So guys, Wikipedia has just informed me. So yeah. Sorry about that. Phone wasn't on mute. So yeah, guys, I mean, honestly, you can say if these human beings weren't fighting human beings, this would be an incredibly beautiful statue. You know, there is an ethnocentrism at work that it's kind of like human beings are comets that, or I should say, asteroids that kind of fall to Earth. You know, the ones that don't melt in as they pass through the orbit. I think it's an asteroid, and the asteroid hits the or meteor or whatever. We're okay here. We're meteors that hit the Earth, and imagine these meteors hit the surface of the Earth and they make a hole instead of being a spherical kind of thing. Impact, you know. Imagine it just goes directly as if like the surface of the planet was made from cheese and it just goes in, right? So from that tunnel, from the tunnels of our own conditioned ethnocentrism, we have to climb out. When the person climbs out, I feel that's when they begin to see that the type of mind required for the advancement of civilization can be totally different than the type of mind that the person is acquainted to. That means I want this excitement flowing around in the species that we are creating something that the potentials are not known beforehand that we can have an opinion. It's an unknown effort. You know, it's like the thing is this is pretty much life. Either the system is linear and you shake it up. Either the system is shaken and you linearize it. And this kind of oscillates in the kind of approaches of the psyche to the external realm. So what I mean by that is ultimately you see like what are people? Yes, you agree they are their body, but their body has been somehow conscious of all the various moments they've been through. So on some level when you talk to a person, you're talking to a storyline of memories. Do you know what I mean? A journey through memories. And this is why suddenly every person's life gets a unique glow. When I realized this, I'm like, oh my God, you know? It's as if 8 billion incredibly intelligent beings, yet they are living artificially intelligent even before they've made AI. Before they've made super intelligence, you know, artificial intelligence, we're acting artificially intelligent. That means our psyches are fragmented in a society that has a sort of machine-like demand from us. At the same time, we are kind of like creatures that momentarily get influenced. So it's like imagine if you wanted to give, let's say somebody was thinking about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the person was like, okay, people need to have freedom of speech, man. You know. So when this guy's thinking, okay, well, what does freedom of speech mean? And freedom of speech means that if your eyes have perceived a design and you can communicate it, you can. You see, this is why the progress of Western civilization has been ridiculous compared to the progress of certain countries. Let me tell you why. Because freedom of thought means freedom for the geniuses to play with all the colors. It's as if it's like a true civilization. Really, the thing is, um, we are evolving beyond nationhood. And this will have a sort of, we need the greatest philosophers of the world to constantly sit down and be like, okay, what does it imply that creatures that have associated with a chunk of the earth, with just a part of the earth, you know, go to another part of the earth and feel they like a stranger? Do you know, I made a declaration. I remembered, I knew where I was before I learned language as a child. I remembered. I was where everything was already. A sort of um, pre-thought heaven. So many people look for paradise in time. Few people wonder, could eternity be an instant? The rage of the last tear is ultimately just an emotion that arises when the potential for the greatness of a system is being ultimately denied, the potential of it. So if you, in some sense, realize you can't push back, sorry, you can't go back any further. Sorry about that, guys. Had to just take a small breather. Honestly, I just see that we are creatures that are influenced by sort of, we have emotions arise by the potentials of future movements of the self now. Do you know? I feel we are experiencing two worlds. There's a world in front of our eyes, and there's a world behind our eyes, and that world changes way more than the outer world and doesn't animate in accordance to law. To, for example, the law of, like, there's, like, you can visualize and any object in front of you kind of floating in the air, that, and then just staying in the air, and you see, it's like, why is it that gravity isn't pulling your imagination down? So, it's as if a certain objective relationship or a pattern of recognition attained from the objective realm in the subjective realm may feel void or hollow. What's the point of all these verbs and nouns hovering in our attention momentarily? What is the point of a changing system of intelligence? What is the point of the separation of the self and the world? What is the point of the relationship of all phenomenology? And at the end of the day, you see you're just the continuation of the presence of attention. And there's something strangely magnificent about the solitude of the mind. I mean, physically, we are creatures we're social creatures. That means, like, if you are alive as a human being and you do not get to experience the winds of civilization while you're alive. So that's kind of like the purpose of the body is pretty much community evolution, you know. But the purpose of the mind is to realize, strangely, I'm going to say this to kind of entertain some people's egos, but I'll say is to attain the ultimate power. So imagine right now you're like some esoteric person, or imagine you're like a rich billionaire, or you're a powerful person hearing me say the attainment of ultimate power. And so let's say you as a human being begin to fathom what is power. If you asked Uncle Ben, Spider Man, he's going to be like, it's something that at least you need great responsibility. But I'll tell you this, that power in this world is when the duality, when the veil between the known and the unknown reveals itself to itself. So it's a sort of remembrance. That's the way I'm speaking about the ultimate power. It's a realization. It's like suddenly noticing something, and the power is there. It was always there. It's like the person went looking for energy only to realize, whoa, everything's in. you know. There's all kinds of human beings. And when you look at human beings, we're not like eagles that can fly certain elevations, but our minds have different, you can say, access portals to the world, you know? I feel like imagine a sky filled with birds, all flying. There's actually a story I'll tell you. It's from a man named Attar, this Persian uh, poet from like I think 1,000 years ago. He was dervish. He in the Conference of the Birds, which is his like next level kind of metaphysical poetry, divine poetry. In it, he talks about the story where all the birds, and instead of birds, I want you to take that as a metaphor for the human being now. Okay, he says all the birds in the world, all the birds in the world began flying in the sky. They had heard of this legend of this ultimate bird called the phoenix, the what's above the above. All the birds start flying. They start flying looking for this phoenix, this ultimate bird, you know and they suddenly, like, they fly so long that eventually some birds are, they give up. They're like, yo man, we've been flying for days looking for this ultimate truth. It's like, what is this, man? I got, like, unhatched eggs. And the person's like, in some sense, like, I got home, I gotta get home to my kids. So in some sense, all these birds that kind of were seeking a sort of potential vision beyond the archetype of their self, they suddenly return. They can't go outside their comfort. They can't be out of their comfort zone for too long. And this is ultimately the distinction between introversion and extroversion. But I'll tell you this. that as the story progresses, all the birds, pretty much the majority of the birds, except 30, specifically Attar in his story, he says, except 30 birds remain. And all the birds kind of get tired and hopeless and they leave. And so these 30 birds are endless. It's as if nobody knows the mysteries of their inner realms that inspires them this far, you know? And so these 30 birds are endless. They have realized it's like they have reached an ultimate level of their own experience through its endurance, through its continuity. Continuity is a spirit that once you find, your eyes were open from the beginning, you know? So anyways, so these birds suddenly realize that they are the phoenix. There wasn't no ultimate phoenix. It was just when a civilization attempts its greatness at least some percentage of it manifests. You know? So those 30 birds became known as the phoenix, and so this is why in the Farsi language the word phoenix is Seymour, which means 30 birds. You know? So, and that's the cool thing. When you realize all cultures have legends and myths, you'll be like, okay, it's like, well, what are we judging? The stories we made? You know, for some people, it's hard for them to see commonality. For some people, it is hard for them not to. And so, of course, it is obvious, you know, from the wise words of Bertrand Russell, man needs tolerance and charity as a sort of moral response to the civilization circumstance. That means you got to kind of feel like, okay, on some level, we're all creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere, and we're here temporarily, and all the resources on the planet are not just misallocated. We formed kind of tribes like Mad Max kind of thing, and we're fighting over these resources. And so, how much can savages be civilized when their actions redefine them out of their civility? So it becomes one of those things that we got to start living stronger behind our eyes than in front of it. That means you have to find eventually life is something that knowledge never ends, really, because as long as there's an energetic effort, the process can continue. The attention can realign. I don't know that we should create a word for this, like um, re-rhythmatize. Like it returns to the rhythm. You know, it's a returning rhythm. There we go. So, anyways, vision. All these birds flying in the sky, different human minds having different ways of envisioning their world. Now, the thing is, in many, like, there's the story also of the Tower of Babylon, which is very crucial, and it's kind of like the essence of the core of this picture, I can say. Like, that story's moral is the same as this one. So, so here's the thing that getting too many thoughts at once. Um, your attention, life. I'm not joking. Your attention is the center of your intelligence. When you can accept it in its simplicity and be content, and when you can accept it in its complexity and magnificence and intensity and be content with that, then your mind finds the same kind of confrontation pattern echoing to different dimensions. So if you live honestly in one moment, that one moment's influence will echo in on all the dishonest archetypes hovering in your subconscious. You know, it's kind of like, I find it fascinating. The purpose of children is in some sense, to grow up, and the purpose of those growing up is to attend to the children. And it's a cycle of life. It's a cycle of a sort of symbiosis with modern updates of the civilization and the old. You know, in certain shamanic cultures, they would put the youngest kid and the oldest person in the family and the youngest family member together. And people were like, why do you guys do this? Why are these two always beside each other? And they'd be like, because one is about to enter the spirit realm. It was a shamanic kind of native kind of mindset. And so it's like one is about to enter the spirit realm, one has just stepped out of it. One is a new program of design, the other is a program of design that has fulfilled it has reached its exertion point. That means there will come a time for all human beings, and especially age does this to the person, that that with the same intensity you have held certain things, suddenly you see your grip loosen and loosen and loosen. And then you realize that there is more at work in the world than just your inner realm. And that's when there comes this kind of strange, I call it, it's the silence where civility was born out of. I think the kind of evolution, this ape in the food chain, in the kind of um, in natural chaotic environments, the way its mindset was that it was running to survive. So it was kind of like fear, intensity, 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 simplicity, intensity, 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 simplicity, intensity, 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 simplicity. And so this creature that has been a perfect word to describe this is bewildered. This bewildered creature that we have now tamed with our conscious attention through a sort of egoic archetype. We are wielding the ape as a thought. How fascinating. It's like somebody taking that bewildered creature and just holding it still, holding it super still. And that creature realizes the whole conditioning of the momentum. You know, conditioning is not just physical, it's not just subjective imagery, guys. Conditioning is certain speeds you accepted truth in. Certain state, the state your mind was when you accepted a certain image as a sort of objective truth. So what it means is yes, the mind is kind of like this data processing kind of system where we process objectivity by having its subjective kind of twin. It's it's subjective, not twin. I shouldn't say that. It's subjective clone in our or subjective clone or like duplicate of it. So what that means is everything you see behind your eyes is being a sort of symbolic value. Okay? So if what we see has a symbol, if that object I'm looking at suddenly becomes like a bottle, you know? So what does that mean? That means I saw something in the silence, and as I made noise, the definition was. So ultimately, all language and all systems of intelligence come down to a kind of stillness of the silence and stillness of the pond before the rhythms came. This is what I find also a kind of approach I personally have to problem solving, where I find that I don't know enough to give an answer. So I'm like, okay, I don't know. So what do? I go look at the problem. I look at the problem, and it's as if when you look at something long enough, you see different dimensions of it. That's it. Our attention is the dawn bringer of knowledge. I remember one day walking and suddenly getting shocked. Just imagine like someone walking on the street, you know, casually, and suddenly I just had to stop for a moment because I considered, whoa, there's 8 billion people alive now, and we, our minds as people, kind of get shocked when one person passes away. You know, it's important. Human life is important to us. But when we look at how many human beings have come and gone, and how many human beings lived a life on this earth that perhaps nobody ever knew what went through their eyes, it made me realize there's literally knowledge for free will becomes just classification, and that's what we see our educational system to be. You're smart enough to see the geometrical ways that knowledge is classified, then you'll suddenly realize, whoa, it's like they cut up a living cake into lifeless chunks and they're teaching it to people. They're teaching memories of the past. They're not inspiring an experiential exploration. And experiential exploration means that the human being has a responsibility, like think of it hunter-gatherer kind of mindset. That's honestly how I see universities. And I feel they should be like this, but they're not really being. Emergent tribes prepared, emergent tribes prepared for inner exploration. I feel like the life we live and the life that lives in us. Your free will, by definition, means freedom to decide what to change with. I feel that there's coming a need for a new kind of knowledge. And I forgot to finish, but I wanted to say the Tower of Babylon story, where all the human beings in the world speak one, are united. Listen to this, are united under one language. And so they start building this great tower to the heavens to reach the state of the gods. And the gods see this, and he's like, "You shall not pass." And the gods kind of, instead of striking man with the tower with lightning, instead of breaking the external, they break the inner realms of man. And so what that means is the gods make people speak different languages so they can no longer communicate with each other to have in such a celestial sort of management to pursue further into the depths of the unconscious. So what it means is that we are in the aftermath of the multidimensional unified process. And so we are reaching a point where I don't know. I mean, of course, I'm one voice in the universe of a countless stars. I mean, I'm like an ant wondering if I'm just an ant, you know? I find an interesting way to maybe approach this concept is that the human being has, due to free will, a possibility to live in their inner realms completely, or to live in the outer realms completely, or to realize that whether you like it or not, the mind requires to oscillate. That means throughout the day, you require to just be moments of objective movement, but you also require to be moments where you're still and that you're conscious of your inner realms. Your subjective realms, it's there, guys. What I'm saying, as visible as gravity. That means it's like, it's strange, but what is visible about it is the fact that when I tell you just visualize something, if I tell you imagine like um, a white glowing infinity symbol, three-dimensional infinity symbol hovering in the air right now in front of you. And then from the center of it, it begins spinning. So imagine you're seeing a spinning infinity sign. You're visualizing a spinning infinity sign made of light, white light. That visualization is freedom. Freedom to project meaning. And it's fascinating. You can sit in a room and everything in that room can have a sort of narrative attached to it, or it can just be stuff in a room. You can look at money and feel it's the most powerful thing in the world, or you can also look at it and be like, what is this green piece of paper? You know? Rage of the Last Tier. It is pretty much uh, how every moment is an attempt at novelty. You can define your life by, yeah, what happened to you in this life so far. You can totally define yourself by that. You can go on entering new rooms, but still seeing old rooms, still feeling like you're in an old room. But really, what it is that the process of manifestation, once you move beyond the language threshold, it's in some sense there is no ideological position. That means we are entering an idea, and as we have pierced through the veil of thought, we are noticing what is beyond the veil of thought has nothing to do with language that was born in the dualistic dimension. I need a whiteboard, to be honest, to truly draw this. Hopefully one day life will grant me enough stability to write on a whiteboard. So, guys, Hunter in the chat section has said all 7 billion people could fit in the Wyoming if you gave them 1 square feet. Yeah, that's an interesting fact. That fact is also as interesting as I heard somebody say, like, the human intestine can, if stretched out, can go around the world a couple times, like something next level like this. And that's the thing. We have to realize it's actually relationship with 3 dimensions, but we acknowledge two and are trying to be one. I think based on how spoiled you are as a human being, you identify with more the inner realm or the outer realm. So I think if you are a person who has been blessed with the gentle kind of life, you most likely your inner realm's demands have been more met by the outer world. So your inner realm is powered. So it's kind of like, I do understand a sort of egoic arrogance that could exist, for example, for the child of a billionaire. But I can also understand that the psychology has developed in a very strange environment. you know Shri Ramana Maharshi says, There will come a time where all you have learned shall be forgotten. And I was like, is she or one of Marshy saying people never learn? But really, the implication of it is the acknowledgement of the temporary is the eternal momentum and fuel for the inner realms. When your mortality becomes your inspiration, then you will realize the value of, I believe, or let me say it like this: what you would say, the honest self. The honest self was a mystery my whole life. I remember it's like somebody telling me to be honest, and I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? Of course, I didn't use that language when I was a kid, but I'm saying like it had that sort of emotional impact, you know, that I was like, how do I know who I am if every day I wake up and it's a new day, a new me, like, you know? So it took me a while to realize that the observer is in effect, or the observer is the cause of the effect. And when you realize that right now you are an objective creature basking in the elegance of an access to certain subjective realms, your imagination, I find people who never have writing blocks, there is a way, it's possible. And the way is that they are in constant awe and reverence and fascination of how the world is here, you know. That means I saw many ways that the eyes of human beings have been opened to this world, and at the end of the day I realize I am left with my own eyes. Okay, interesting. So in the chat section, Hunter says, but we're convinced the planet is overpopulated. Sure. Plus, the more desire we want, the more stuff with space we want as a human being, the less space is actually free for people. So I feel with our overpopulation is also causing us that live in, like, for example, societies, and like it's causing civilization to become inefficient because of the lack of space. So yeah, there is definitely overpopulation, but the thing is that what is different? We will only fear overpopulation if we think people don't have minds. So let's thank existence that there's a mind behind the body. 8 billion bodies, yeah, we freak out. 8 billion minds, oh my god, you know how much potential there is for us to find new solutions to our old problems? Like the idea is, this is kind of what I noticed. I'm like, okay, so if we as people don't use our intelligence, if we are 8 billion people who act like trees, then civilization is doomed. People are not sharing their inner realms because they feel society is overall blind to their vision. That means when a person doesn't feel valued in a system, why should they contribute to that system? I mean, it's just common sense, right? The person's like, why should I do something that doesn't add to my dimensions of experience? So this is why we have this constant exchange kind of mentality with our energy and action. But sometimes we have to consider the exchange rather than a short-term kind of sense as a long-term. So sometimes it's like we are kind of wondering about like our behavior now is going to influence the cultural engineers of all the years of humanity to come. Sorry, guys, I'm getting a bit distracted here. Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. I was considering that and how we're not utilizing our space properly because we have a certain preference for living. But here's the thing. I feel a person in their life, they're either contributing, their actions either contribute to outer technologies or inner technologies. And outer technologies are really the vehicle, or you can say the kind of grand hall that civilization will be, where various people are journeying through this hall. That means, believe it or not, this world is like a tourist attraction for animate creatures. And so, as animate creatures enter this realm, that means due to some intelligence. Now, we can get into that, its core depth, which I often do in these talks. But what I'm saying is, like, there's a sort of requirement to realize that because people are temporary, we have to begin seeing the mind as a resource. We are overpopulated. We have, like, if the whole planet was a psyche, like the psyche's fragmented into nations, there's war. And what is war but the disagreement of the unwise? It's kind of strange. I think ultimately all human altruistic behavior is just watering a garden that you just water for a little while and you won't even be there to see how the trees give fruit in the future generations. You have access to your own realm. For me, I find if a person finds an honest world to live in, which is another way of saying that you realize the experiencer rather than just being contained in a sort of objective interpretation of the experience, an objective experience or a subjective experience, right? It's like when a person gets angry, that's when a person who's insulted gets angry, that's a person who their subjective realm is solid to them. They believe they are the thought. That's why when the thought is pushed out of their attention zone, it's like, oh my God, how dare someone just give me their own limited image of me. Yeah. Sometimes you have to get rid of anger before it gets rid of you. You have to get rid of hatred before it gets rid of you. These are contaminations. You see, in many mystical practices, and especially even religious and various sacred ceremonial practices. Now, I'm not talking about the kind of in an intellectual way. I'm saying some things had value because people did them. Do you know what I mean? It's like when you look at your grandfather who is like very old and he's a religious man, you know, regardless of whatever atheistic perspective that is like for the better good of the overall moral society, you'll be like this man requires his calmness. So if he asks, you're open to respond, but you do not intrude in, for example, do you know what I mean? So you don't judge a person just because of how they're holding a thought. You should never. This, when you attain this, the Dalai Lama would probably give you a high five, you know. Anytime you reach this level of simplistic, playful kind of allowance for life to be life, the Dalai Lama is going to be like, good job, bro, and then he's going to leave, you know. Really what it is when the problem, when there's no solution for a problem, the person's going to be like, okay, the problem is in a certain dimensional boundary of definition. So if you look at how something is put into motion, you clearly understand it. Sometimes I've had, especially in driving, for example, when I drive, you know, when I have these long kind of drives I have to do. So in those long drives, like I remember there was a time I had to grab my brother from Barrie. You know, I live in Toronto. He was in Barrie, and I would have to go kind of drive and grab him, like, you know, every week, you know. And so in those drives, you know, depending on like, I was very tired that day, you know. And so what happened is, it's like you have to not just be mindful of the subjective framework you're working with. It's like in every moment, you have to be aware of what you're putting in the moment and what is being put in the moment by its own. When you attain this sensitivity, you will eventually begin to see how your mind is not just being the whole moment, it is being the animate force of the moment. So, what that means is you're being reintroduced, you know, very playfully by Mr. Within in this episode, to how you have actually had a presence of mind. But this mind is not definable, it is the definer, it is the expression, it is intelligence in action. The director has already shouted action, and it's like the actor's like, yeah, just living. If we take this notion that if we want to forgive the self of selves, and we realize the self of selves is the world, and we realize the world is simultaneously present as the self is simultaneously present, this renders all multidimensional kind of outtakes of self into a singular moment. So it's kind of like realizing everything that has ever happened to you has been a moment of experience. It has been presence. Sometimes life can be so active, it doesn't need definition. It's like that guy running from a tiger in the woods. It's like, yo, it's like you ask him what's the meaning of life, he'll be like, hey man, you know, it's like running from a tiger, that's what it means. It's everything has a shadow, I feel. If we consider consciousness to be a sort of light of a candle and the biological body is the wax of the candle, this light, this illumination, it is the presence of intelligence, is it not? How light is being used by us to be a subjective sophistication of some sort of inner work behind our face, like there is way more in this landscape of perception than just atoms or electrons hallucinating humanhood. I remember realizing an ultimate truth. This ultimate truth, it's like the best book to write. Sorry, the best book to read is the one that you will write. That means in any moment of life, don't just try what's good, don't do just what's bad. Attempt the great. That means, like, from the middle way of the Buddhic mindset, we kind of dive into the world. That's what true contentment is. Do you know what Buddha understood sitting under that tree? That before the shenanigans of suffering, there was silence first. There was the inanimate. So, what that means is, regardless of the perspective of chaos came first, then order, or order was there first, and then it turned to chaos, whether there was um, whether there was a fallen angel or there was an ascended man, regardless of the various ways human beings have processed humanhood. I'm going to share something really personal. I think it's like it makes sense to share it now. A person's mind has a very incredible potential. It can not just animate a sense of self, it can animate a sense of self for others. And when it can animate a sense of self for others, it can also animate a sense of self in its subjective realm purely. So that means it's like when you see a person, the thoughts you have of them is relevant to their objective existence. But when you have a thought alone, it's relevant to only your objective existence, or it's relevant to no objective existence. It's just thought in the air, thought in the air. There are thoughts in the air, guys. That's some perfect album name for a musician. The eyes of the human being, every human being, is the mystery of our civilization. Every person has an unknown component to their being. When you are comfortable with the unknown, you automatically become comfortable with how knowledge moves, how it comes and goes. It's as if you don't forget your eyes in the sights of others. You realize the mirror kind of effect that's going on. That you are mirroring yourself, just like when you look at ink on a piece of paper and those words evoke certain images in your mind. When you look at it, someone else, same way you made that ink into an image, you are turning them into an image. And so ultimately realizing all intelligent activity is like, if you have an identity, it's self-claimed, isn't it? Like it's self-originated. Okay. So, anyways, guys, I feel like we're reaching our destination, you know, for this flight of this episode. I remember telling a friend who would repeatedly share this self-depreciating narrative about himself to me, like a close friend, you know. Uh, and I told him, if you're not willing to forgive yourself, how do you dare expect others to forgive you? And it was kind of like a moment of just both of us just staring, like acknowledging the silence, you know. So it was a situation where you have to kind of consider, if you're not willing to externalize your greater self, why should a savior care to externalize it? Why should others care if you don't care? In other words, so I find that that's a way to for someone to kind of recalibrate their life vision. Henry David Thoreau says, it's not what you're looking at, it's what you see. And so what I'm looking at is known, and what I'm seeing is unknown. The seer within is unknown. This is why consciousness being rendered a mystery, the hard problem of consciousness yet having an answer, either suggests the limitation of the linguistic simulation, or it in some sense suggests that the mystery stands, the unknown X variable in the equation is the soul of the moment. And so that's a cool thing, because I notice all of philosophy is defined by people who have claimed ideology. They have chosen to shape their perception linguistically. But you see that there are many ways that, as much as the eyes learn from things being added to the moment, the eyes also observe and learn from things leaving. Eventually, the question arises, what is moving on? And that question comes into a sort of isolated thinking subject, as Rene Descartes would say. And in that isolated thinking subject, you're like, who is this a thought of me? What is the thought of me? What is thinking? What is thinking? And suddenly the silence, suddenly the stillness hits you. You look at this world as if you have judged it in a way where you were only a guest, you were a stranger in this house. how you treat the world is another way of how your mind is projecting itself. And so man does not need just an ability to move beyond objectivity, but beyond subjectivity, really. When you can treat your thoughts, or you can observe their workings just like how you observe like a bird on a branch, then you will become, in quotations, refascinated. You're going to be really fascinated about realizing that every value you ever have can be seen in a new angle, new light. So that possibility of the new means the possibility to change the overall structure and meaning. So that means really truth in a changing world is kind of like change. And the more, it's kind of, they say it's like what you own owns you. And so if you feel you're an owner of this body, that means you will feel you are just this body. The thought has no jurisdiction to move beyond the objective consideration. And so I feel there are hidden skies behind our eyes that deserve piloting through. So anyways, guys, if anybody has a comment or question, um, feel free to share. Otherwise, I will return to the void. All right, guys. As Rumi says, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a place. I'll meet you there. And when the soul sits on that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Wonder about how your mind is the candle lighting up the room of your meaning, of your reality. Wonder if your free will is just on the material, objective, biological side of the moment, or do you have a free will to navigate in your subjective realms? Do you have a free will of how the attention realigns the structure, the geometry to how the subjectivity of the moment is kept? Become fascinated by the only mind you have ever been. And beyond enlightenment, beyond language, the truth is its own vision. Much blessings and namaste.